learned it through basic Python. So again, Python is not really part of the syllabus, so you guys do not need to know it. अगर सिर्फ explain करने के लिए आपको बताऊंगा. So let's say we have a very simple program that is there to find the larger value. Okay. So we'll ask the user to input the number. So let's say num1. We'll do int input, enter number. Then we do same for the second number. And then we check if num2 is greater than num1, then we're going to print num2. Or we can just set max to num2. And if num2 is less than num1, then max is set to num1. Else we'll just print that they are duplicates. Or we can, we don't need to print duplicates for now. Or let's print it. Okay, so I'll input two values on, let's say 50. Okay, I input 50 and then I input 99. So it doesn't say anything because I forgot to print the values. Let's skip this one. Okay, so 55 and 19. So it says larger value is 90. Then we have, let's say, -5, -5, and if we have 0, it is larger value is 0, right? So this is working perfectly fine. Okay, let's assume कि वाला जो आपका program है, this is needed multiple times in your main program, right? So the only way you can reuse this is by copy pasting. This is the only way you know by now. That is not a good idea. देखो आपको ये पूरा code अब आपको repeat करना पड़ रहा है. Let's say if you have to change the name to some other variable, maybe name to updated, then you'll literally have to go and change all the variables in all the copy pasted versions. Plus in Kappas way, they're not linked together, so they're all disjoint, and then you'll have to make changes individually. So this is not a good idea by any means. So what we can do instead is कि अगर आपने कोड को reusable करना है, what you do is you just wrap it in what we call a module or a subroutine. So what I'll do in Python is I'll just define, I'll give it some label. Let's call it max finder, and then that's it. Literally that's it. अब ये एक module बन गया, and then I can just call it as many times as I want. So if I call max finder here, so यहाँ पे it will work perfectly. So यहाँ पे मैंने Python की example दी होगी. Okay, so enter number, again 55. So yeah, this should be now too. Yeah, rerun this. It's taking too much time. Right, so I'll input 99 and then 52. Okay, something is wrong with that. Just to look that. Okay, find it. So I input 90 and then 55 and it runs perfectly fine. Okay, now let's say ये वाला जो code है इसमें अब आगे there's supposed to be something else. So maybe there's supposed to be some random program. So let's say आपके पास यहाँ कुछ program की processing है. I'm just putting in some dummy statements just to show कि यहाँ पे कोई actual program हो रहा है, and then you want to find the maximum number again. So यहाँ पे again for input 5 and 2, and then it says larger values 2, and then there are multiple processing or different programs, let's say, and then you again put in 2 values, and then it still works perfectly if the larger value is 100. This is what a function or a procedure is, basically a subroutine. So it makes the code reusable, or you can call as many times as you want at different parts of the program. ठीक है, ओके, अब इसमें आपको सबसे पहले तो पता होना चाहिए कि इसके एडवांटेजेस और डिसएडवांटेजेस क्या है और इनकी डेफिनेशंस क्या है. सो प्रोसीजर इज अ सेट ऑफ प्रोग्रामिंग स्टेटमेंट्स दैट आर ग्रुप्ड टुगेदर अंडर अ सिंगल नेम व्हिच कैन बी कॉल्ड टू परफॉर्म अ टास्क. And the function is literally the same, but it will return a value. So what does return keyword do? अभी ये जो हमने लिखा है, this is basically a procedure. ठीक है, इसको हम procedure बोलते हैं. I'll get rid of all this. Okay, so procedure में we do not return a value. Instead, we just simply output the values on the screen. Now, what does it mean to return a value? Let's say आपने यहाँ पे main program के अंदर this is the body of the function or the procedure, and इसके बाहर जो आपका कोड है ये सारा main program इसको बोलते हैं. So we need to call it. So this is the call. So this is the procedure or subroutine call. Okay. Again, this is in Python just to show you. Okay. अब यहाँ पे let's say if we want to use this value. So ये जो maximum value आपने यहाँ पे get की है, you want to use this value further. So you can maybe let's say compare it with another max. So you can say if max is greater than the previous max, let's say. आपको overall एक max find करने in the whole program. Now the issue is कि ये वाला जो variable आपने यहाँ पे max use किया ना, this is a local variable. Local variable का क्या मतलब होता है? It's a variable that is made and deleted within this context, within this subroutine. ठीक है? So ये यहाँ से बाहर कोई इसको access नहीं कर सकता. So max wouldn't be accessible at this point. Although Python में हो जाता है, but technically इसका जो scope है, the extent to where it can be used is defined by this subroutine, these 7-8 lines. Now, what if you want to use this value in the future program, okay, in the further parts of the program? So, इसके लिए आपने क्या करना है? You can just simply return the value. Now, what does return keyword do? It will terminate the execution of the function and it will return the value back. So, this is very important. हम लोग जब conditional loop के अंदर use करते हैं, found is equal to true, found is equal to false, until this and that can all be done using this return, because return में you literally just return a value. इसकी मैं example देता हूँ आपको. So, let's say define something, और इसमें मैं कहता हूँ एक मैं loop लगाता हूँ from 1 till 100, and I'm just going to print the values of I in the same line. Okay, nothing happens when I run it because I have not called it, so I call it now, और ये आपके पास values print कर देगा. Okay, so it's printing all the values in the line, right? Now here I can just put a check. I'll say if I becomes equal to, let's say 5, then you're supposed to return, let's say 0. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 के बाद it instantly stopped. It literally the function ended. So this is what return does. एक तो ये कि आपके function खत्म करेगा. Secondly, it will bring back this value that you have returned here. So we're returning, let's say इसको कह देते हैं -999. So let's make it a large value, and then we can actually capture it outside the call. So we can say जहाँ पे call हो रहा है, let's call it received या response. And then when you print the value of response, you will actually get -99999 like this, right? And the advantage is कि अब आप इसको यहाँ पे compare कर सकते हो इस value को. So you can then compare if the response is greater than some like other variable, then do this or else do that. So the advantage was again यहाँ पे जो आपके पास value है, that is a local variable. This is all happening inside the module. But if you want to access the value of this max outside the module, उसके लिए फिर आपको रिटर्न का कीवर्ड यूज करना पड़ेगा. सो आई चेंज इट हियर एज वेल. अच्छा, अब रिटर्न की कीवर्ड because it will terminate the execution of the function. Anything you write after return would not work. So again, like the example of this, अगर आप यहाँ पे return pentanine लिखते हो और उसके आगे आप print statement भी डाल देते हो, it will not do anything. और ये देखो, ये आपको see, it doesn't print the values anymore because you put the code after print. So once something is terminated, so you cannot really access it. But if you bring it outside the condition, then it works. You go it inside the condition, it stops because return, as soon as it returns, it won't be printing anything. But if you bring this line one line above, like this, so it becomes, it now prints 5 as well. And then you take it again one line below, it doesn't do anything. So this is the main idea. Okay, now I'm going to return the value of max here. I'll get rid of this print statement here because it's useless now. And we'll just bring it one line above. So either we can do it here, and since we're returning the value of max anyways, so we can just catch it here. जहाँ पे आपने subroutine को call किया और यहाँ पे आप print कर लो. The larger value is max, and it will still run the same way. 90, 60. It says larger value is 90. Now the advantage is कि ये जो max की value आपने return किया, now you can use it. So now you can say if max is equal to, let's say, something large value, then something something something. इस तरह से. So I hope the idea is clear now. So we'll move back to pseudocode. So यहाँ पे ये return का keyword ये करता है. अच्छा, इसके बाद then there is the value of parameters. Okay, so ये जो number 1 और number 2 हम यहाँ पे input ले रहे हैं ना, what if we don't take them input inside the module? Instead, they will be passed by the user when we call it. Okay, इसका मतलब क्या? It's actually simple. यहाँ पे you will ask the user to input these values, okay, and then they'll be passed as parameters. So these are the values that the subroutine would need to actually work. So यहाँ पे अब हम num1 और num2 को pass कर देते हैं like this, and then we'll cache them above as well, num1, num2. Now everything else remains the same, और कुछ भी change नहीं हुआ. So if we redo this 90 and 50, it still works the same way. So ये जो values आपको यहाँ पे नजर आ रही हैं, these are called parameters, and these are the values which we passed into the module to be processed. ठीक है, जैसे आपके पास, let's say if you have अगर आपके पास coffee machine है, so coffee machine में the parameter would be the coffee beans. Without the coffee beans, it won't work. So the same logic applies here. So जब आपको parameters का specifically कहेगा, तो आपने parameters में value भेजनी है. और अगर उसने आपको कहा है कि आपने input inside the module लेना, तो you will just bring these lines inside the module. Now, what are the advantages of using them? So you need to memorize these for the definition part. So the code is reusable, it can be called multiple times, it is easier to debug, and it is more readable, etc. Okay. Okay, then we have, okay, now we have the local and the global variable. So as I explained, max is a local variable here. It is only limited to the scope of this module. So ये आपको definition पता होना चाहिए. A variable that is defined within the scope of a module and is not accessible on the outside. Or global variable क्या होगा? So global variable is something that is defined at the highest scope of the program. So let's say if I make score 100 here, so now everyone would be able to get the value scored. So inside the module and by default outside the module as well. So you have a global variable. So this is a variable that is defined at the high scope of the program, which is usually at the top, and then it is accessible throughout the program. So this would be your global variable. ठीक है, so ये आपके पास सारे जो है ना इसमें basics cover हो गए. We don't need to know this. That's the whole idea. Okay, now we'll look at the pseudocode part for this. So pseudocode part में इसमें आपको syntax याद होना चाहिए. First you have to write procedure, then the name of the procedure, then parameters if there are any, colon और उनके आगे types. So यहाँ पे Python में ऐसे नहीं होता. and then function gives the name, parameters, and then यहाँ पे the only new thing would be the return type. So it will write returns, और आगे यहाँ type आपने बतानी है, integer, string, boolean, etc. When you call a procedure, you will always write call and you write the name. But when you call a function, you will always assign the value to a variable because it would be returning a value like we saw here. So अगर आप max को return कर रहे हो, तो you need to cache the value of max. But if it is a procedure, like let's say something was a procedure and it was not returning a value, so यहाँ पे you will just simply return it. And some examples, write subroutine that takes parameter of count and then prints that many stars on the screen. So for this, what we can do is that we'll have to create a procedure. Let's call it star counter. And then they're saying take parameter of the count. So count would be an integer. We do that. And then we'll run a loop from 1 till count and we output that many stars and we end the loop. Now the advantage of this is, again, we can call this procedure as many times as we want with as many parameter values as we want. So this time maybe we have 5. So it will go from line 9 to line 2. It will run the loop 5 times. So 5 stars will be printed. Something like this maybe. And then from line number 6, we go back to line 9. And then we go to line 10. And from line 10, we go all the way back to line 2. We copy the value of 3 in count. So here we get the count. And then we output that many stars. And then we end the procedure and we go back to the line. So this would be line number 10. And then this would have printed 3 stars. And then you can also take input from the user and just pass in the variable. You don't need to necessarily name them the same, but we can do that just to make stuff easy for now. Right? Okay. Then we have procedures for printing if a number is even or odd. So if a number is even or odd, we can write a procedure for that. Again, procedure, name of the procedure, even or odd. Then we have the parameter, whatever the number is. Then we take its modulus by 2. If it is equal to 0, output even, else output odd. And then again, you can call it as many times as you want on as many values as you want. Like this. Then now we have to write a function for checking if the number is even or odd and return 0 for even, -1 for odd. Okay. So now in order to make this work, we write a function. We call it even or odd or whatever the question demands. Then we have the parameter, and in the return type would be an integer, because if the question says that you have to either return a 0 or a -1. Then we check if the modulus of the number by 2 is equal to 0, then we return 0. What would return to? It would instantly bring the 0 into the line we called it from, and this is the line we're calling it from. So this would be the caller line. Okay, and if the number is odd, let's say it's 13, so it will return -1 and it will bring -1 in x. And then the function ends and they go back to line 12. But the user wouldn't be able to understand responses like 0 and -1. So in order to make more sense of it, we should print even or odd, and we can just do that by comparing. So if we got a 0 from in the value of x which was returned, that means it was even. And if we got a -1, it means the response was, the value was odd. The only reason we have to do this extra step is because we are returning an integer value. If the question had said return string, then you could have just directly returned even and odd there, and then you wouldn't have the need to do all of this. Right? So this is structured programming pretty much. Let's look at the latest past paper questions for this. So we got a couple of questions for this in the latest paper and in major body 5 as well, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this one. So this was not a well-attempted question at all. If you look at the examiner report for this, for paper 2.2, and this is question number 9B. paper 2-1. Or 9b, the majority struggled with the question, writing a function with a parameter. Some achieved all the marks available. Okay, so this is not a frequently accessed examined topic because this was added in 2021. So whenever they give you a question now, it's usually tough for the students to actually do this. Okay, so what do we do now? The question says that there are two variables that are used in a program. A holds a whole number and B holds text. Write pseudocode statements to declare the variables A and B. Okay, very simple. So we have whole number in A, so we can just say declare A as an integer and then declare B as a string because it will hold text. So you get 2 marks for this. Then the function odds. Okay, so you can clearly see in X here, this is the parameter. It returns odd, and if the value of X is an odd number, so returns odd. So return type would be string, and returns even if the value of X is an even number. So we have to define the function and we have to call the function using parameter A and store the return value in variable B. Okay, a lot of stuff is happening in these 6 modes. First of all, let's do the easier question. That is the function call. So they're saying call the function using parameter A. So the name of the function is odds, and in it they're saying use the parameter A. So we write the value A, and then whatever the value is returned, we store it in B. So this is pretty straightforward. This is how we're supposed to call the function. If it had been a procedure, we would have used the keyword call like this. But since it's a function, you have to assign it a value because assign it a variable because we're returning a value. Okay, now we have to define the function. So again, it's not too difficult. So it's a function. So the syntax we just discussed a while ago. This is the syntax. We have the function. Then we write the name. Then we have the parameter, its type. Then we have the return type. And then somewhere along the way, we have to use the return keyword as well. So I'll write function odds. X is the parameter, and X would obviously be an integer like this. You can write in block letters, this is totally fine. And then it will return either odd or even. So that means we are returning a string. So returns a string and function like this. So the body of the function is created. Now we just need to add the code here. Okay, so we need to return odd if the value of X is odd. So simple, we just find the remainder. Remainder is mod of X by 2 like this. And then you can simply check if the remainder is equal to 0. So if the remainder is equal to 0, then we can just return even, key capital, else we just return odd. And then we end if. And then we have to finish the function, complete the function, and that's it. This is the whole thing. So this was again a very poorly attempted question. And you can clearly see why, because students are not really well prepared for this topic. But you just have to follow the syntax and just remember that you have what a parameter is, what a function is, what a procedure is, and then everything else is the same. All the syntax of the code that you've written is pretty much the same thing. Then I believe the other questions are from the 15 marker. So once we do that, we'll cover it there. But this was pretty much the whole introduction to functions and procedures that we need. There is one more question here that is related to power sorting now. So maybe we can do this as well. So this is from May June 25, paper 2-3. Okay, the swap section in lines 11 to 13 of the existing code are to be changed to a call statement. Okay, so this is some code that we have to use to a call statement for a procedure. The procedure will include 2 parameters representing the indices of the array element to be swapped. Okay, so if you guys remember power sorting, the idea is, let's say if you have an array like this, and you are supposed to just swap the value. So if there is 6 and 4 here, so you will just switch the places. So 6 goes here, 4 goes here, so it becomes 4, and then this becomes 6. You are supposed to swap their values. So this is what you have to do here as well. So if we look at the code above, we have a values array, we have some index, we have some hold, the variable, and then we are swapping here the values. This is the real code that we have to look at, this part. Right? Okay, so they are saying that we are supposed to write the indices that we'll be using in order to swap the values at a given time. Okay, so in order to do this, we'll just take help from the code above. We don't have to do it from memory. So we can assign any two values here. They're saying they would be swapping two indices. So we can just name them anything we want. Let's call it index 1, which would be an integer, and index 2, which would also be an integer. So we can assign them a combined integer, or you can do it separately as well. That is completely fine. Integer like this. Okay. Then you have to just write the logic here correctly. So if you have the value from index 1, you're saving it in the variable hold. So this is the same logic given above. You get the current index value, save it in hold, then you get the next index value, save it in the current index, and then you bring back the value from hold into the next index. You literally just have to change the values. Index becomes IDX1, and index plus 1 becomes IDX2. Everything else remains the same. So now the only change is that the code becomes reusable. So here we'll have index 1. Then the name of the array was values. Index 1 would get assigned the values of whatever is stored at index 2 of the array. And then finally, at index 2 of the array, we'll bring back the value from the variable that we have before, which is called hold. And that's it. So the same logic above, except now the code is reusable, so we will not need to copy paste. We can simply swap any two values using this reusable procedure. Now just saying write the pseudocode to transfer control to procedure swap. Okay, in order to do that, it's simply a tricky way of saying that you have to write a call to swap. So they actually wrote it this way to confuse. Transfer control means to call. So we'll write call, swap, and then we have, okay, so let's look at the variables that we have. We have index, stop, hold, index plus 1. Okay, so index is the variable that will have some value. Right, so we need to pass an action.
How do we know when we write call or when we assign an arrow when we have to call it the procedure again?
Right, so when we have to call a procedure, this is the syntax that you use the call keyword and then you write the name and the parameters. But when you are calling a function, then you have to use the function and you assign it the value to the variable. So this is a clear distinction between these two. Right. So since we made it a procedure, which is clearly written here, so that is why we have to make sure that we use the right syntax. Okay, so this is how it would look like. So we would have a current index and then we would have the next index. So you can write 5, 6, but in this case we would not do that because in the original algorithm, if you see, it says the value is index. Right, so index is the variable that has been used here. So we have to stick to this value. So we can pass in the current value and then the next value. So this would become. So this becomes call swap index, comma, index plus 1, which simply means that if the value of index is currently 5, so 5 plus 1 becomes 6. If the currently index is 3, then 3 plus 1 becomes 4, etc. And then this whole procedure would run, and then you can see the change happening. And then explain the difference between the global variables and the variables declared in 3b1. Okay, now again, since we are inside a module, and then all of these variables, especially this variable hold that we're making, is a local variable. So like I explained, what global and local variables are and how are they different. So you can just write the difference here for 2 marks. You will say that global variables are defined in highest scope of program and are accessible throughout, while variable used in 3B1 is a local variable, and it is only accessible within its scope, which is the procedure, the swap procedure. So this should get you 2 marks. And if you again look at the exam report for this is paper 2-3. This was not a well attended question from what I remember. Question number 3, part. Okay. So candidates were asked to, many candidates also found this question difficult. Okay. So stronger candidates understood this was a standard cause statement. So like I said, they intentionally wrote it that way. And then many candidates found this question difficult. Stronger response understood the first blank required parameters. And then they also found this question less difficult. Okay, less difficult because you just have to explain and define these 2 things. So with this, the whole structured programming topic is done.